Welcome to the Radical Imagination Propaganda, the second part. To continue the conversation about the media and what is to be done. Before we even begin to think about things like the tabloids, let's look at a broadsheet with seemingly left-wing bearings. I quote from A Beginner's Guide to the Guardian by Darren Allen. He writes, "The Guardian newspaper is a limited company and has been from 2008 when the Scott Trust was wound up and replaced by the Scott Trust Limited, which comprises of a board of bankers, management consultants, venture capitalists and other classic left-wingers. The paper itself is written nearly exclusively by the elite educated members of the upper middle class. The viewpoint you would expect to come from this privileged setup is what you get." The article goes on. Murray Donald, in his Hidden History of the Guardian, explains that the Guardian was launched to undermine working class leaders of the early 19th century reform movement, whose members were massacred at Peterloo. During the Guardian's 150-year history, has denounced Ireland's freedom fighters, women's suffragettes, Abraham Lincoln's campaign to end slavery, third world nationalism, and pretty much any kind of genuine independence from the system. The Guardian supported Tony Blair even when the worst of his crimes were known and continues to give him uncritical space. The Guardian regularly presents official pronouncements as news, regularly disguises adverts for its corporate sponsors as news, and regularly finds time to pour bile on people like Jeremy Corbyn, Julian Assange, Media Lens, and Noam Chomsky. The latter, who was so appalled by Emma Brock's infamous and outrageous distortion and misrepresentation of Chomsky's views in Srebrenica, made him force the Guardian to print a long retraction. End of quote. Noam Chomsky, at the Rebellious Media Conference in 2011, criticised the intelligent minorities for keeping the ignorant masses out of the decision making. He said, "The media pick on this and replicate it." He also suggests that blaming the media for undermining the left was like blaming the banks for making money, as would be relying even on the so-called quality broadsheets to give a fair and balanced view of what's happening around us.
Professor Chomsky, could we start by listening to explain what the propaganda model, as you call it, is? For many people, the idea that propaganda is used by democratic rather than nearly authoritarian governments will be a strange one.
Well, the term propaganda fell into disfavor around the Second World War, but in the 1920s and the 1930s, it was commonly used and, in fact, advocated, not by leading intellectuals, by the founders of modern political science, by Wilsonian progressives, and of course by the public relations industry, as a necessary technique to overcome the danger of democracy. But the agenda-setting media, the ones that sort of set the framework for everyone else, like the New York Times and the Washington Post and so on, these are major corporations, parts of even bigger conglomerates. Like other corporate institutions, they have a product and a market. Their market is advertisers, that is, other businesses. Their product is relatively privileged audiences, more or less.
They're selling audiences.
They're selling privileged audiences. These are big corporations selling privileged audiences to other corporations.
And is this anything more than the idea that basically the press is relatively right-wing, with some exceptions, because it's owned by big business, which is a truism, is well known?
Well, I would call the press relatively liberal. Here I agree with the right-wing critics. So especially the New York Times and the Washington Post, which are called, without a trace of irony, the New York Times is called the establishment left. Right. But what's not recognized is that the role of the liberal intellectual establishment is to set very sharp bounds on how far you can go, this far and no further.
Now, if the press is a censoring organization, tell me how that works. You're not suggesting that proprietors phone one another up, or that many journalists get their copy spiked, as we say?
It's actually Orwell you may recall, has an essay called Literary Censorship in England, which was supposed to be the introduction to Animal Farm, except that it never appeared, in which he points out, look, I'm writing about a totalitarian society, but in free democratic England, it's not all that different. And then he says, unpopular ideas can be silenced without any force. And then he says two reasons. First, the press is owned by wealthy men who have every interest in not having certain things appear. But second, the whole educational system from the beginning on through just gets you to understand that there are certain things you just don't say.
This is what I don't get, because it suggests that, I mean, amateur people like me are self-censoring.
No, not self-censoring. There's a filtering system that starts in kindergarten, goes all the way through, and it's not doesn't work 100%, but it's pretty effective. It selects for obedience and subordination, and especially I think that's
so stroppy people won't make it to positions of influence.
Behavior problems, or if you read applications to a graduate school, you see that people will tell you he's not doesn't get along too well with his colleagues. You know how to interpret those things.
I'm just interested in this because I was brought up, like a lot of people, probably post Watergate film and so on, to believe that journalism was a crusading craft and that there were a lot of disputatious, stroppy, difficult people in journalism. And I have to say, I think I know some of them.
Well, I know some of the best and best-known investigative reporters in the United States. I won't mention names because I'm like, whose attitude toward the media is much more cynical than mine. In fact, they regard the media as a sham, and they know and they consciously talk about how they try to play it like a violin. If they see a little opening, they'll try to squeeze something in that ordinarily wouldn't make it through. And it's perfectly true that I'm sure you're speaking for the majority of journalists who are trained, have it driven into their heads that this is a crusading profession, adversarial, we stand up against power, a very self-serving view. On the other hand, in my opinion, I hate to make a value judgment, but the better journalists, and in fact the ones who are often regarded as the best journalists, have quite a different picture, and I think a very realistic one.
How can you know that I'm self-censoring? How can you know that journalists are self-censoring?
I'm sure you believe everything you're saying, but what I'm saying is if you believe something different, you wouldn't be sitting where you're sitting.
When equality newspapers and even the British Broadcasting Corporation are called out for lying, we know we're in trouble, or perhaps ready for something different. So in the first video we discussed propaganda filters, some history and the modern advancement of such. Today we're heading towards hyper-propaganda, where it isn't even hidden anymore. It lies on the surface for all to see, and perhaps along with the bureaucratic state, just something else we have learned to get used to, and is pointed directly at the many who are obsessed by things and future purchases throbbing in the backs of their minds, while the media war to maintain ignorance rages around us. So what lessons is there to be learned if the recent media stage is our classroom? We've all watched the corporate media go into meltdown over the last few weeks of UK elections. As the days got nearer the day for voting, the headlines in the West's worst tabloids got more vile, gobsmacking, lying and criminal, while the so-called quality rags went along for the ride, delivering biased news reports in the service of their Tory master owners. In the last video we mentioned the father of propaganda and his propaganda instruction manual. Over the last month or so during UK elections, we have witnessed a masterclass in the art of public persuasion, although Bernays himself would have been aghast at its crudeness, its lack of subtlety and downright brazenness. The establishment media nailed its colours to the mast for all to see, and it did not look pretty. Those members of the public entrenched in its falsehoods and those who profit from media lies were even shaken. And we need to note here the illegality of much of it. It is against the law to lie in newspapers to persuade voting for a political party. We should not hold our breath though, thinking that any of murder's criminal negligence will come to much, as criminality is reserved only for the lower orders, mostly from the class of folk who helped to keep the Sun and its like-minded tabloids in business. The so-called qualities were even worse in their misinformation, as the discerning reader of the broadsheet is deemed educated and equipped with a critical perspective, had none or not much to offer. A critical perspective the working classes are educationally denied, or rather for the many once involved, have forgotten. After these revelations, we need to start the conversation. Where do we go from here in decolonising the mind of fake news? How do we get corporate influence out of the news outlets and or determine our own? Let's take a look at what journalism is supposed to look like in case we've forgotten.
You said we don't have all the facts. So what are the, like, what is the most
Well, that's why we need
powerful?
an independent commission. We need an independent commission to get all the facts. All we have is clues.
In France, they hacked and trashed Macron in a bid to elect the right-wing immigrant-bashing Marine Le Pen.
You said that Russia attempted to hack Macron in the French elections.
Yeah, well, we know that. I mean,
The Washington Post has reported that the French cyber intelligence agency has said that it's not true.
well, I mean, I haven't read this article, but certainly Macron is convinced.
not true.
Yeah, well, certainly Macron was convinced of it, and everything that we read before was.
Well, I mean, it was reported days ago.
the
Associated Press.
Well, all the information I've seen is that there was a hacking and a data dump. The weekend before, there was certainly a data dump, and so are they saying?
Maybe it could have been anyone.
Well, it's quite
The French top cyber intelligence agency, the government got access to the
Do you
servers.
support an independent commission?
Yeah, but look at
we'll get to the
what.
bottom
But
of
you
it.
said that Roger Stone hosted a show on RT.
Roger Stone hosted a series on the Russia Propaganda Network.
Do you believe that we need to
Roger Stone didn't host a show on RT,
You're saying he's never been on an RT?
but he didn't host a show.
Okay, well look, you can go over any picayune details you want, but I don't see why it would be in your interest to support an autocratic authoritarian government which is jailing journalists and fighting against freedom around the
I
world.
think we should tell the people the truth.
Well, we absolutely should tell the people the truth. If Macron is now saying that the Russians had nothing to do with it, I very happily stand corrected. But we know from the FBI, the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, that Russia was involved in trying to subvert our election. And why would you try to hide that?
You also talked about Venezuela, Philippines, and Syria.
Duterte's Philippines, Assad's Syria, the recent chaos in Venezuela. All the despots, dictators, and kleptocrats have found each other, and Vladimir Putin is the ringleader of the unfree world.
Do you support regime change in those countries?
But absolutely, from the people, democratic revolution.
Who do you think would come into power?
He's a killer. Let's talk about Duterte.
He was democratically elected.
Well, he is a killer who is
He was
assassinated.
elected. He has 80% approval. You support regime
Well,
change?
Hitler was elected too, then you may as well say.
He wasn't elected.
There's massive.
Hitler won power through a coalition with the conservatives.
Well, but there was a democratic government, so I mean, it was the Weimar regime was a democratic government. But
Who would come into power in Syria, do you think, if Assad were and the whole government were overthrown, considering that Al-Qaeda is leading the armed opposition?
well, I would not favor Al Qaeda, and I presume you wouldn't favor Al Qaeda either.
I think it's very dangerous to get up and call for regime change.
To call for democracy around the world, that's what America is. And we don't support democracy and human rights all over.
What
the world.
happened in Iraq?
Why is that dangerous?
Well, look at what happened in Iraq. It sounds like.
Iraq was based on lies and propaganda by the Bush administration. It was all based on
How do you know? How do you
weapons
know
of
this
mass
isn't lies and
destruction.
propaganda
Wait,
to advance an
that's why we need an
agenda?
independent commission. Are you opposed to that?
All the people out here.
Are you? Let me just ask you a question. Do you favor an independent commission to get to the truth, or do you oppose that?
It would be fine, but I think a lot of what we'd uncover is that you
Well,
have
we
not
don't know
told the
what we don't
truth.
cover. Well,
But you got up and stated certain
that-
things as facts that are clearly not true.
Well, that's why we need an independent commission, because all we right now is what leaks out of the Trump administration. Do you think the Trump administration is telling the truth about their connections with Russia and Azerbaijan? And
Well,
oil magnets
I
and
think
the
that Kushner,
that's an amazing thing.
Kushner owes.
What's your expectations about Mr. Comey?
Hey, wait a minute! I'm in the middle of an interview, boss.
Well, he's just a couple of questions. What do you
Do you? Why aren't you talking? Okay, wait a minute.
Because
I'm going to tell you. Why
Why
don't you think we're talking about Saudi and Israeli influence here?
Oh, go and look at a speech that I made about Saudi Arabia and the human
And
rights.
Israeli influence.
Yeah, but by all means, let's have the truth.
Well, why aren't you doing that here? Why aren't we talking about jobs or racism?
Well,
It's about Russia You said that Russia installed. You said that. Okay.
Let's set up a debate and we'll have a debate.
Public, do you want to do it?
Donald Trump is the hoax perpetrated on the Americans by the Russians.
He got up and said that Trump is a Russian hoax.
But there's a lot of uncertainty.
He said that Trump is a Russian hoax. We have it on camera.
Okay.
The other thing people have been experiencing over these last few months is a maturing of an alternative media. A media that is making even the broadsheets pale in in-depth critical thinking. The brazen media are still not convinced that change is in the air, that new emerging democratic media is coming of age and it's not controlled by the establishment. But the next attack on social media and open source could be catastrophic to this new media freedom. Over the last election, the left had made advances. It's now up to the activism to establish the vehicles and models to take that advantage forward, using the newfound energy to create more of it for the way ahead. Otherwise, the gains made will dissipate into the air like a firework display, short-lived with no future, just like most of the recent jingoism posing as news. The question is, can the new media get to the people it needs to reach? As Henry Giroux reflects, the left seem to have ignored that in the crisis of politics, in the crisis of agency, in the crisis of history, in the crisis of ethics is not being matched by a crisis of ideas. It's not enough just to know there is a context for everything, which is why history is so important. Otherwise, as Giroux adds, folk will be left to be led by the right disimagination machine, where literacy, a disability, education by media, and the truth is nothing more than an opinion. People in communities are clutching at straws. They do not have the benefit of a privileged education. They do not have the time to sit down in the library and read up on things. They can sometimes feel alienated and intimidated by the alternative media. Most in the worst off communities who find an outlet for political or creative pursuits usually leave. Add to this unemployment, homelessness, austerity, rent, debt, and these are only starters. Is it any wonder many of the desperate stray towards populist parties, believe the propaganda and rage against the left? We need to stop academic posturing, speaking only to our peers and telling folk how wonderful the world could be once we find the absolute solutions, which we will go on to describe in detail, usually by more words, raising expectations that turn to dust. We need to stop talking about the grassroots and get into communities and connecting with it, and helping these places to debunk the propaganda by helping folk to articulate their own ideas for their own view of the world. The flourishing of the bureaucratic and propaganda state is partly due to the disconnection and lack of human interaction, where politics and education have become unnuanced and practically explained in simple graphics in some cases, particularly over the last 10 years of the digital age. We have won net neutrality, but things are bound to get worse as paywalls and the rollback of this freedom is continuously being attacked. The internet is only a tool, a useful tool, if we can use it usefully to defend ourselves against the predatory one-way traffic. But tools that need to be remembered cannot replace human communication, nor replace the eons of time that many of us waste in front of computer screens. The media war is between independent-minded journalists and corporate-sponsored journalism, between the internet, which offers a platform for open comment, and a tool in the fight against the growing project to undermine internet neutrality. But if the human connection is not at the forefront, it will always come back to the intelligent minorities keeping the ignorant masses out of the decision-making process, both on the left and the right. Sooner or later, it will be realised most of the critique by the intelligent minorities on the shape of politics, the planet, and our survival on it could be a waste of time, unless we can find some practical means of getting to, in a form that is useful to those who do not spend their day on the internet absorbing and regurgitating data. Many are hungry for news and information, not the junk that pours out the mass media every day, but information that can help ordinary people to be part of transforming the world. But they will not come to the media. The media needs to get to them.